June 25th, 1941, near Brest-Litovsk, western Belarus. Dawn. A pale gray light creeps over the fields as mist curls around the chassis of halted German panzers. The engines tick softly in the cold morning air, still warm from the night's march. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a Soviet artillery piece cracks, once sharp, distant, and the sound rolls low across the grass like approaching thunder. Inside Panzer III turret number 231, Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Mertens wipes condensation from his periscope with a gloved thumb. He hasn't slept in nearly 40 hours. His crew hasn't either. The advance of Heinz Guderian's Panzer Group II has been relentless, swallowing villages and scattering Soviet units that seem confused and unprepared. But this morning feels different. You can almost feel it with him, the tension under the calm, the quiet expectation that something unseen is waiting in the fog. Mertens adjusts his headset. "Term bereit," he mutters. "Turret ready." His gunner, Feldwebel Rittner, leans into the sights. "Still nothing," he replies. "Probably another light BT or an old T-26. Same as yesterday." And that's what everyone believes. From the generals in forward headquarters to the mechanics wiping oil from their sleeves, the assumption is universal. Soviet armor may be numerous, but it is outdated, lightly armored, thinly gunned, poorly coordinated. The panzers have been operating under an illusion formed by years of intelligence reports and reinforced by the first days of battle. But illusions don't last. A shape emerges in the mist. At first, it looks like a barn, dark, broad, hunched low to the earth. Mertens blinks twice, thinking his tired eyes are playing tricks in the white haze. But the shape keeps moving, slow, steady, unbothered by the mud that made yesterday's Soviet light tanks slip like toys on ice. Rittner goes still behind the gun. Das ist. Not a BT. The fog thins, and the silhouette sharpens. A long, sloped glacis plate, heavy welded seams along the turret sides. Wide tracks, biting effortlessly into the marshy soil. A Soviet T-34, model 1940. The tank that German intelligence had mentioned, only in fragments, often dismissed as exaggeration or misidentification. A machine few German crews had ever seen, and none had taken seriously. Now it stands less than 500 meters away, its armor glistening with dew. Mertens feels the cold air tighten in his chest. "Feuer," he orders. Rittner fires a 50mm armor-piercing round. The recoil slams through the turret, rattling every bolt. The shell screams across the gap and strikes the T-34 square on the hull. A flash, a clang, nothing else. The Soviet tank keeps coming. No smoke, no fire, not even a hesitation. The German crew stares in disbelief. Rittner loads another round with trembling urgency. "Commander, that should have gone through." Mertens doesn't answer. He's watching the T-34 turn its turret slowly, deliberately, like a giant waking from sleep. The Soviet gunner inside is calm, patient, almost methodical. This is not another flimsy T-26 desperate to escape. This is a duel, and the T-34 chooses the moment. A red muzzle flash blooms from its 76.2mm gun. The shell tears past the Panzer's bow, exploding against a tree behind them. Splinters rain across the crew hatch. The ground shakes. Someone in the hull curses. Then more shapes appear in the fog. Another T-34. And behind it, something even larger, boxier, heavier, the silhouette of a KV-1. This is not a skirmish. This is a wall of steel the Germans didn't expect to face for years, if ever. Mertens whispers, barely audible through his mic. Where did they get these? He knows the answer doesn't matter. What matters is the realization settling over him like frost. Their 50mm guns are nearly useless. Their armor is too thin. Their tactics based on speed, maneuvering, and outmatching Soviet tanks suddenly mean nothing. All along the forest edge, other Panzer crews are awakening to the same truth. Reports crackle through radios. Shots bouncing off. Enemy armor too thick. KV-1 blocking the road we can't penetrate. For the first time since the invasion began, German tank commanders feel something unfamiliar: doubt. The fog lifts further. Sunlight spills over the Soviet machines, illuminating the angled armor that seems to defy every hit. The wide tracks churn through mud, as if it were dry earth. The Soviet crews, anonymous behind steel plates, maneuver with confidence that borders on eerie. Guderian's doctrine was built on momentum: overwhelm, encircle, advance. But how do you overwhelm something you cannot kill? Mertens watches the KV-1 bring its turret to bear on one of his platoon's Panzer IVs. The German tank fires first, its short-barreled 75mm gun punching a round straight into the KV's turret. It leaves only a scorch mark. The Soviet tank fires back. This time, the German vehicle erupts in flame. Mertens' voice cracks as he shouts for reverse gear. But he already knows the truth. This is not about one duel or one battlefield. This is the moment Germany's armored invincibility begins to fracture. And somewhere, far behind the lines, inside the halls of OKH, that fracture is about to widen, because word of these encounters will reach them soon, and the reports will be undeniable. Germany is not the only nation with modern tanks. They never were. They only thought they were. What happens when the architects of Blitzkrieg realize the Red Army has built a machine they cannot easily destroy? June 25, 1941. Forward command post of Panzer Group 2, east of Brest-Litovsk. The smell of damp earth and engine fumes hangs in the cramped wooden hut that serves as the forward headquarters. Maps cover the table's creases worn deep from constant use. Arrows drawn in thick pencil strokes, showing the pace of the German advance. For 3 days, everything has gone according to the vision of Blitzkrieg. Fast, clean, predictable. Then a radio operator pushes through the doorway, headset still hanging around his neck. Neue Meldung von der Front. A new report from the front. General Heinz Guderian looks up from the map and narrows his eyes. The operator hesitates before handing over the message slip. Something in the man's expression is wrong, an uncertainty that doesn't belong in the opening days of a victorious campaign. Guderian reads the short line of text once, then again. Feindliche Panzer unverwundbar, Geschosse prallen ab. Enemy tanks invulnerable. Shells bouncing off. The room falls silent. At first, the officers assume the crew is panicked, misinterpreting what they saw. Maybe the Panzers were firing at long range. Maybe visibility was poor. Maybe the Soviet crews were lucky. But then a second report arrives. Then a third. Then an entire platoon radios in, their voices cracking with disbelief as they describe shells striking angled armor and shattering into sparks. It makes no sense. It contradicts everything German intelligence had predicted. Guderian walks toward the doorway. Outside, the sound of distant artillery echoes across the plains. He steps into the cool morning air, thinking, the Soviets weren't supposed to have anything that could stop a Panzer III or IV at close range. Their doctrine was to swarm with light tanks BT series T-26 seconds machines that German crews could tear apart at will. But the transmissions keep coming. Unbekannter Typ. Sehr starke Panzerung. Unknown type. Very strong armor. Keine Wirkung trotz direktem Treffer. No effect despite direct hit. One message describes a Soviet heavy tank blocking an entire column, absorbing shot after shot before casually returning fire. Guderian frowns as the pieces begin to assemble into something deeply unsettling. This isn't exaggeration. This isn't panic. This is consistency, and consistency means truth. Inside the command hut, an officer spreads intelligence sketches across the table. The reports align with rumors German scouts had heard months before the Soviets were experimenting with sloped armor, new diesel engines, and heavier guns. Rumors dismissed as crude or unreliable. Rumors treated as the byproduct of poor Soviet reporting. But now, the battlefield is speaking more loudly than any spy report ever could. A liaison officer from Army Group Center enters, coat still dripping with morning dew. He brings a message from higher headquarters. OKH wants confirmation. They refuse to believe the Red Army has produced tanks beyond Germany's own modern designs. The idea threatens the very foundation of Blitzkrieg. If the spearhead loses its edge, the whole doctrine collapses. Guderian dictates a response. His voice is calm, but there is a seriousness in it that his officers are not used to hearing. Bestätigen Sie. Feind verfügt über zahlreiche Panzer neuer Bauart. Sehr gefährlich. Weitere Erkenntnisse folgen. Confirm. The enemy possesses numerous tanks of new construction. Very dangerous. Further information to follow. He pauses, then adds a line he never expected to send this early in the campaign. Unsere bisherige Panzerbewaffnung ist unzureichend. Our present tank armament is insufficient. The realization spreads through the staff like a chill wind. On a map that, until yesterday, looked like an unstoppable arrow plunging toward Moscow, a new variable has appeared one Germany had not prepared for. One they do not yet know how to counter. Another messenger arrives from the west of the salient. An engineer unit tested, recovered shell fragments, and confirmed the rounds had struck sloped armor that deflected incoming fire rather than absorbing it. Sloped armor, a concept Germany had studied, but not implemented. The T-34 wasn't just strong, it was modern. Too modern for 1941. Some officers mutter under their breath. Guderian studies the reports quietly. His mind is already calculating, adjusting, reacting. He has built a career on speed, on daring advances that break an enemy before they can react. But this time, the enemy is the one forcing the reaction. Bring me the artillery liaison, he orders. And the 88 seconds. If Panzer guns cannot pierce the Soviet armor, then only the famous 88mm anti-aircraft guns might serve as tank killers. It's a temporary fix, not a solution. But for now, it is all they have. Outside, a motorbike dispatch rider speeds away toward nearby units, delivering orders to reposition anti-tank assets. Inside the hut, officers whisper over the reports, tracing lines on maps with trembling fingers. One asks quietly, if they have these in large numbers, what then? No one answers, because no one knows. A new message crackles over the radio, this one more urgent. A Panzer battalion reports having encountered not one or two, but an entire line of these new Soviet machines. A wall of armor. The officer, reading it aloud, stops mid-sentence. His voice catches. Guderian closes his eyes for a moment. The battlefield is changing. Blitzkrieg is meeting something it was never designed to face. And the German command must choose adapt quickly or bleed slowly across the endless plains of the East. He turns back to his staff. Prepare a full report for OKH, he says. They need to understand what we are facing. But even as he speaks, he wonders whether they will believe him. What happens when the architects of the invasion realize they have underestimated an enemy with far more steel and far more innovation than anyone expected? June 26, 1941, a forest clearing east of Kobrin, midday. The smell of burnt oil hangs heavy in the air. A Panzer recovery unit stands silently around a wrecked turret, its edges twisted by a Soviet shell explosion. Bits of shattered 50mm ammunition lie in the mud like broken teeth. The men stare at them, not with fear, but with something deeper: confusion. A captured fragment of the enemy tank sits before them, dragged out of the tree line by tow cables. It is a chunk of steel, thick, angled, unyielding, cut from the side plate of a knocked-out T-34. The mechanics run their hands across the surface. It's colder than they expected, denser. The slope is steep enough that even mud slides off effortlessly. Wie soll das zu durchschlagen sein? How are we supposed to penetrate this? No one answers. A Feldwebel kneels and taps the armor edge thoughtfully. Sloped armor isn't new as an idea. German engineers have studied its advantages for years. But seeing it here, on a mass-produced Soviet machine, forces a realization no one is prepared for. The Red Army didn't simply upgrade an old tank. They leapfrogged an entire generation. A Panzer III drives into the clearing and halts beside the wreck. It looks suddenly small, boxy, upright plates, a comparatively narrow stance. Its 50mm gun seems almost delicate next to the brutal simplicity of the Soviet design. An officer from a nearby reconnaissance battalion steps forward with a clipboard. His uniform is still dusty from the morning's fighting. "We counted 12 of them," he reports. 2 KV-1 second. Couldn't flank them all marshland. Shots bounced. Everything bounced. The men listen. Every word is a strike against the belief in German superiority. He continues. "They advanced in a line, slow but unstoppable. Our rounds slid off like rainwater." The phrase hangs in the air like rainwater, a metaphor no one will forget. Nearby, a captured T-34 stands, where its crew abandoned it after running out of fuel. Mechanics swarm over it, prying open engine hatches and examining the suspension. And that's when they discover the next shock. The Christie suspension long-travel, high-speed, wide-track design lets the tank glide over mud that German vehicles struggle to cross. Where a Panzer sinks, the T-34 rides the surface. Its diesel engine is simple, rugged, and resistant to fire. The slope turret, cast as a single piece, offers a profile difficult to hit cleanly. But the real fear comes when they climb inside. The 76.2mm gun dominates the turret interior. For a moment, the mechanics imagine what it must feel like to face this weapon from inside a Panzer III, a cannon twice as powerful as theirs, with rounds capable of tearing through German armor at ranges they never trained for. An artillery officer runs his fingers along the rifling with a kind of reluctant admiration. "This is not a primitive machine," he whispers. "This is engineering." And a messenger arrives, panting, handing over another field report. This one describes a KV-1 that took more than a dozen direct hits before finally being immobilized, not destroyed, immobilized after an 88mm flak gun was brought forward. The 88mm, Germany's most feared cannon. One of the only weapons powerful enough to crack heavy armor. That it needed to be used against a tank this early in the campaign was never part of the plan. At the edge of the clearing, the German officers gather around the T-34 one more time. Someone places a Panzer III armor plate next to it. The difference in thickness is staggering, yet the Soviet plate weighs less because of its slope. Efficiency through geometry. They run through the calculations. A 50mm AP round striking a 45mm sloped glacis effectively hits armor equivalent to nearly 90mm. No wonder the shots bounced. No wonder crews panicked. The officers looked down at their own tanks, still smelling of overheated engines and burnt rubber. Good machines, reliable, agile, well-trained crews. But suddenly, outdated. A lieutenant shakes his head. "We were told the Soviets had numbers," he says quietly. "Not quality. That myth is dead now." In his stand, later in the evening, as the sun sinks behind the tree line, a Panzer battalion regroups after a brutal engagement. The survivors gather around their commander, exhausted, uniforms stained with sweat and smoke. He tells them what few want to accept. They must adapt. They must change tactics, because charging forward like they did in France will only lead to burning metal and lost comrades. He demonstrates in the dirt how they should angle their tanks, how to lure a T-34 into crossing fields where 88 seconds can reach it, how to coordinate with engineers to dig concealed gun pits. It isn't elegant. Blitzkrieg was built on movement, not static duels. But it's the only way. As night settles, a mechanic wipes grease from his hands and looks across the field where the T-34 carcass sits in the moonlight. Even destroyed, it feels victorious. Its armor plates gleam, reflecting the soft silver glow like a beast merely sleeping. He mutters to himself, "What else have they built?" A question that, by winter, the entire German high command will be asking. Because if the T-34 is just the beginning, then the road to Moscow is far longer and far bloodier than any map suggests. June 27th, 1941. Near Baranovichi, late afternoon, a line of flak 88mm guns stands between wheat fields, their long barrels pointed low, far lower than they were ever designed to aim. The crews work in hurried silence, ramming shells into the breach with practiced precision. Sweat glistens on their faces despite the cool breeze. They know what's coming. We're after. Thinks they know what's coming. Across the field, The ground trembles. A deep metallic groan rolls through the earth, carried on the wind. Birds burst from the treetops. The horizon wavers in the shimmering heat above the mud. Then shapes appear. First one, then another, then 5. A line of T-34 seconds, advancing without haste, without fear. Their tracks churn through mud as easily as a plow cutting soil. Behind them, the hulking silhouette of a KV-1 drifts into view. Its heavy plates catching dull orange light from the sinking sun. An officer shouts, "Feuer frei!" The first 88mm round leaves the barrel with a crack of thunder. The shell slices across the field, hits the nearest T-34, and finally, punches a hole straight through the sloped armor. The Soviet tank shudders, smoke pouring from the exit wound. But the others keep coming. The gun crews fire again and again. Each round, a desperate attempt to hold the line. Is Nada's end. Back at a forward maintenance depot, mechanics are cutting metal plates from destroyed Soviet tanks and welding them onto German hulls. Improvised armor, rusted, heavy, ugly, but necessary. A corporal slams his fist onto the workbench, frustrated. Our shells are useless unless we hit them from the side. We can't get behind them, they turn too fast. Another mechanic wipes grease from his sleeves and responds quietly. When you face a machine better than yours, you must outthink it. The mood is grim. They know the mathematics of survival are changing. Is Nada's end. German infantry, shaken after repeated encounters, begin dragging captured anti-tank rifles into new firing pits. Field commanders instruct troops to aim at vision slits, tracks, or the narrow gap beneath the turret spots, so small they might as well be ghosts in the fog. A lieutenant teaching new recruits sketches a T-34 outline in the dirt. Shoot here, or don't bother. The men exchange uneasy glances. Istebreikery, farther west, a Panzer unit rolls into position. Their thin-skinned tank destroyers, armed with 47mm or early 75mm guns, were meant to handle fast-moving light tanks, not monsters with armor thick as a fortress wall. But orders are orders. They dig in along a tree line, concealing their silhouettes with branches. Their commander, a veteran of France, studies the battlefield through binoculars. In France, he destroyed dozens of light tanks with ease. It was like a game, quick, clean, precise. But now, as he hears the rumbling Soviet engines approaching, the memory feels like something from a different era. The first T-34 bursts out of the tree line, armor glinting in the evening light. Auf Sie, open fire. The German guns bark, shells streaking into the Soviet line. Sparks erupt across the enemy hulls, but nothing more. No fire, no halt, no visible damage. The Panzer crews exchange horrified looks. Wiederholen. Fire again. The second volley hits but rebounds. The Soviet columns advance steadily, unbothered, the sound of their engines deepening like a storm building over flat earth. One German soldier whispers, "We're shooting pebbles at giants." Istebreikery. At headquarters, reports flood in faster than officers can process them. A staff major circles positions on a map with red pencil, marking points where T-34 seconds have broken through thin German lines. A colonel reads aloud a message from a field battalion. Enemy armor, superior in all aspects. Engaging only slows them. Requesting 88 seconds or air support. Another report describes a KV-1 absorbing 14 direct hits before a shaped charge finally disabled its track. Even disabled, it continued firing until ammunition ran dry. A general stands back from the table, his jaw tightening. "We underestimated them," he admits. Someone else mutters, "If this is what they have now, what will they bring in a year?" The question is not rhetorical. It is fear turned into words. 1. Meanwhile, Luftwaffe reconnaissance pilots flying over the Eastern Front photograph tank factories deep inside Soviet territory. Rows of machines, endless supply trains, columns of vehicles painted in factory-fresh green. Germany had expected a collapsing adversary, Instead, they see an industrial giant awakening. Pilots bring the photos to headquarters, where analysts stare in disbelief at the scale. "This is not improvisation," one murmurs. "This is preparation." End quote. End quote. End quote. Guderian studies the images quietly. He knows the truth now. Germany is no longer overpowering a weak enemy. Germany is racing against time. That night, as exhausted tank crews set up camp, one man writes in his diary by lantern light, "I believed our machines were the finest in the world. Now I have seen tanks that ignore our guns and crush our lines. If we do not change, these fields will become our graves." He closes the notebook, hearing distant engines in the darkness. The Soviets are still moving, still advancing, still learning, and every kilometer east is becoming a battlefield Germany never expected. What happens when an army built on speed and precision is forced into a war of endurance against an opponent built to outlast them? June 29th, 1941, outskirts of Slutsk, early morning. A pale sun rises over fields battered by tank treads and artillery blasts. Smoke clings stubbornly to the treetops, drifting like slow-moving ghosts. A lone Panzer III sits half-hidden in a ditch, its crew huddled around a small fire. Their uniforms are still stained with the soot of the last engagement. No one speaks. Inside the turret, the metal smells different now, not like oil and paint, but like fear soaked into steel. An orderly arrives with fresh dispatches from headquarters. The commander unfolds the papers with shaking hands. The message is not angry. It is not panicked. It is something far worse. It is sober. Reports from Army Group Center confirm what frontline troops already knew. The enemy's tanks are not the exception. They are the new standard. The T-34 and KV-1 are appearing in numbers large enough to shape the battlefield, and they are not scattered anomalies. They are organized, deployed, and backed by an industrial network deeper than any German strategist had predicted. As the Panzer commander reads, he feels the words settling like ice. Z3 and IV only effective at close or flank range. Avoid head-on engagements. Utilize 88mm support. Adjust tactics immediately. Adjust tactics. The phrase echoes in his mind. Blitzkrieg was never built on adjustment. It was built on momentum, on never giving the enemy time to breathe. But now the enemy is the one dictating the terms. Is one. At headquarters of Panzer Group II, Guderian stands before a group of exhausted officers. The clatter of typewriters fills the air as radium and relay non-stop traffic from across the front. Maps are redrawn. Arrows shift. Entire regiments are redirected. Guderian taps a wooden pointer against the thick red line representing the Soviet defensive belt. "Understand this," he says, voice firm, but heavy. "The campaign will not end quickly. Their industry is larger than we expected. Their tanks are stronger. Their reserves are deeper." He pauses, and their willingness to fight is absolute. Around him, the room stays silent. These men have marched through Poland and France with near unstoppable confidence. But the Eastern Front is showing them something entirely different. A war that cannot be blitzed. A land that swallows speed whole. An opponent who yields nothing without taking something in return. Is one. A few kilometers away, a destroyed T-34 sits on the roadside, burned out but unmistakably formidable even as a carcass. German engineers examine the chassis. One of them shakes his head. If this is what they send now, what will their factories produce once they are fully mobilized? Another replies quietly, "We believed we had time. We do not." In Berlin, OKH analysts begin compiling comparisons. German armor thickness versus Soviet armor thickness, gun penetration tables, fuel logistics, terrain analysis. The numbers reveal an uncomfortable truth. While Germany perfected tactics, the Soviet Union prepared for endurance. Hitler receives early briefings describing the shock encounters with T-34 seconds and KV-1 second. He dismisses some, doubts others. But the reports continue flowing identical, undeniable, unavoidable. For the German officer corps, this marks a moment of internal fracture. Some cling to belief in German engineering supremacy. Others accept reality. The Eastern Front is not a campaign. It is a test of survival. Today, as June turns to July, Panzer crews begin adapting whether headquarters orders it or not. They lure T-34 seconds into choke points. They use forest shadows to mask movement. They coordinate with 88mm guns like lifelines. They fire smoke rounds first to blind, then maneuver for flank shots. Tactics replace confidence. Ingenuity replaces doctrine. Hope replaces certainty. But even with adaptation, something deeper is shifting. A diary entry from a crewman near Borisov captures it perfectly. "I have always believed our training made us superior. But training means nothing when your shell cannot pierce steel. We must learn again." When? Germany is now learning in real time under fire, losing men every kilometer. In what thing? As the sun sets on another long day of fighting, a reconnaissance unit watches a line of Soviet tanks withdrawing east to regroup. The T-34 seconds move with a kind of effortless resilience, their engines growling steadily. Even damaged tanks seem to shrug off punishment that would cripple a Panzer. A young officer, binoculars raised, mutters to himself. They are not retreating out of fear. They are retreating to come back stronger. Behind him, the wind carries distant thunder. Soviet artillery. The rumble of factories awakening. The sound of a nation mobilizing far beyond the scale Germany imagined. West, as night blankets the battlefield, German commanders sit around lantern-lit tables, studying maps while the crackle of radios fills the air. They know invading the Soviet Union required boldness, but defeating it will require something far greater. Patience, adaptation, endurance. The T-34 and KV-1 have done more than shock German Panzer crews. They have rewritten the battlefield itself. They have forced Germany to confront a truth no one wanted to accept. This war will not be won quickly. This war will not be won easily. And for the first time, Germany is no longer certain it will be won at all. The commander folds the dispatches. Outside, firelight flickers against steel hulls. Engines warm for another restless night. Tomorrow, the Eastern Front will demand more. More steel, more men, more willpower than Blitzkrieg ever required. And deep in the forests ahead, the Red Army waits, preparing the next blow in a war that has only just begun.